It's November 2023 and I've taken a journey from Avignon out into the country and back nearly 2,000 years to the tallest aqueduct ever built by the Romans and the city it served. I've been staying in the ancient city of Avignon in the south of France, but now I'm travelling into the countryside of the river Gard and crossing high above it one of the wonders of the Roman world, the Pont-du-Gard aqueduct. At 48.8 metres or 160 foot high, the aqueduct is the tallest of all the aqueduct bridges built by the Romans and is also one of the best preserved. Forming a major part of the more than 50 kilometre long aqueduct that brought water from the springs of Fontaine-d'Eau near Uzès to the fountains, baths and homes of the citizens of Nîmes, modern-day Nîmes. Whilst a straight line descent from the source to Nîmes is only 20 kilometres, the aqueduct needed to work its way around the foothills of the Massif Central, with the full length of the route requiring multiple bridges and tunnels. Add into that the elevation difference between source and basin in Nîmes being only 17 metres. That's a pretty shallow descent, but thanks to their engineering, the Romans achieved it with room to spare, transporting around 40 million litres of water a day, with the water taking around 27 hours to flow from source to basin. Construction of the aqueduct is believed to have taken place between 40 and 60 AD, in part dated to coins discovered in the outflow in Nîmes that only date back to the reign of Claudius between 41 and 54 AD and no earlier. It's believed that construction of the Pont-du-Gard cost around 30 million sesterces, which would, adjusted for 2,000 years of inflation, come in around the 70 to 100 million pound mark, well below the modern price tag for a structure of this size or complexity. To reach its full height, the bridge is made up of 3 tiers of arches made from local shelly limestone. An ancient quarry, from where much of the stone is thought to have been extracted, sits on the bank just a few hundred metres downstream from the bridge. The lower tier is made up of 6 22-metre high arches that span 142 metres, with 5 piers in the riverbed itself. Above that, 11 20-metre high arches span 242 metres, and on top of that sits the arches of the aqueduct conduit itself, originally spanning 360 metres with 47 7-metre high arches, but today reduced to 35 arches and 275 metres. The lower tier of arches are 6.4 metres wide, shrinking to just 1.2 metres wide for the conduit. The spring that fed the aqueduct still exists today and is now the site of a small modern pumping station producing very pure water which is high in dissolved calcium carbonate leached out of the surrounding limestone. This proved to be an issue in Roman times in maintaining the aqueduct, as this would then be redeposited along the length of the aqueduct, slowly reducing flow. If you thought removing limescale for your kettle was a problem, you'll get the idea. And to some extent that is what led to the decline and eventual abandonment of the aqueduct, as maintenance on the structures was neglected following successive waves of invaders disrupting the region from the 4th century onwards. It's believed that aqueducts stopped supplying water around the 6th century, though there are suggestions some water was still making it through until the 9th century. Although stones from 11 of the upper arches were plundered over the years for use in other projects, most likely for the buildings of churches and other religious buildings, the bridge remained largely intact, surviving as it was a useful toll bridge across the valley. In the 13th century, the French king granted the seigneurs of Uzès the right to levy tolls, and that right later passed to the bishops of Uzès in return for them taking responsibility for maintaining the bridge in good repair. Might as well make the thieves the guardians. Significant damage was caused in the 16th century when Henri, Duke of Rohan, made use of the bridge to transport his artillery during the wars between the Royalists and the Huguenots who he led. To make space to get his artillery across, he had one side of the middle row of arches cut away by about a third to make a gap wide enough to get carts and cannons across. Early attempts to save the bridge came during the 18th century when the local authorities repaired the bridge to fix cracks, fill in ruts and replace recently lost stones around 1703. 40 years later, a new bridge was built next to the original so road traffic could be moved off a historic structure. Though novelist Alexandre Dumas was strongly critical of the new bridge, commenting that it was reserved for the 18th century to dishonour a monument which the barbarians of the 5th had not dared to destroy. Despite the interventions of the 18th century, by 1835 the bridge was at serious risk of collapse from erosion and loss of stonework. Enter Napoleon III, who'd had an admiration for all things Roman and who visited the Pont-du-Gard in 1850. Shortly afterwards, he approved plans to repair the bridge in a project that was carried out between 1855 and 1858 with funding provided by the nation. Works included replacing eroded stone, infilling some of the piers to aid stability, and separating the bridge from the aqueduct to improve drainage. Just to prove both how good the Roman engineers were and how thorough the 19th century repairs were, the bridge survived 3 major floods in 1958, 1998 and 2002 that washed away other bridges and damaged other nearby structures. During the 1958 flooding, the waters submerged the whole lower tier of the bridge. By the middle of the 16th century, the bridge had become an important part of the grand tour that the upper-class young European gentlemen of sufficient means and rank would take on coming of age. By the 1990s, the Pont-du-Gard had become one of the top tourist attractions in France, congested with traffic that was still allowed to drive over the bridge and cluttered with tourist shops and structures. Architect Jean-Paul Viguier said the appetite for gain had turned the Pont-du-Gard into a fairground attraction. A major 4-year project kicked off in 1996 with the backing from the local council, the French government, the EU and UNESCO, who'd listed the bridge as a World Heritage Site 11 years earlier. It saw the entire area pedestrianised and a new visitor centre and museum built on the left bank, designed by the same Jean-Paul Viguier. Today, paths take you up and around the structure, so you're able to see at all angles, from the riverbed to high above, including in the summer months being able to take a guided tour across the aqueduct itself. All year round, you can walk through one of the tunnels that was built through the hills as part of the full aqueduct. Alternatively, on a bright but windy Saturday in late November, you can have the 5th most popular tourist attraction in France almost completely to yourself. The bridge isn't the only ancient structure in the area. Close to the end of the bridge on the right is the Grotte de la Salpêtrière, a prehistoric shelter that would have seen humans looking out over a landscape without an ancient aqueduct for many millennia before it was built. On the left bank, you can climb up and see where the structure would have continued were it not for those 11 arches worth of stone having been plundered. The Musée du Pont-du-Gard in that modern visitor centre looks at both the history of the construction of the aqueduct, including going into detail about many of the other bridges and structures along the route which haven't survived as well as the Pont-du-Gard, as well as exhibitions on how advanced Roman plumbing truly was. The only reason for the existence of the Pont-du-Gard lies 18 kilometres to the southwest in the former Roman city of Nîmes, today Nîmes. Colonia Nîmes was founded sometime before 28 BCE, with veterans of Julius Caesar's legions from his Nile campaign given plots of land to cultivate on the plain. The Nîmes aqueduct arrived around 90 years later to add to the temples and palaces of the city, and around 10 years after the aqueduct, the founding of the arena, with construction being completed at a similar time to the Colosseum in Rome. The Arena de Nîmes is one of the best preserved Roman amphitheatres in the world. 133 metres long, 101 metres wide, the outer facade is 21 metres high with 2 stories of 60 arcades, an arena floor measuring 68 by 38 metres. At the height of its use, it's estimated the arena could hold 24,000 spectators spread out over 34 terraces, hosting public events and theatre, as well as gladiator fighting. The arena is still in use today for concerts, reenactments of Roman games and bullfighting. But in between, the arena has had a number of other roles. With the empire torn apart by civil wars and barbarian invasions, the city shrunk in size and strengthened its defences. The arcades of the amphitheatre were blocked up, and the structure became an important part of the city's defences, with large numbers of people from the city taking refuge inside what had now become the fortified castle. Following centuries of sieges, invasions and occupations, the city eventually started to recover at the end of the 12th century when a new city wall was built further out from the amphitheatre, opening up more room in the town. But the structure remained an important element in the town's defence system, with a neighbourhood having grown up around it with its own churches. During the 14th century, the amphitheatre lost its military value, but remained a residential quarter. In the 16th century, influenced by the ideas of Renaissance, King Francis I wanted to return the amphitheatre to its previous appearance, but progress was slow, and 200 years later there were still around 150 houses inside the arena. Clearing of a monument began in earnest in 1786, when all the houses that had been built inside the structure were demolished, but it still took nearly 70 years before the first bullfight took place inside the arena, and it was restored to its role as an amphitheatre and venue. Today you can ascend up through the structure to the very cheapest of seats, high up. Or you can descend down to ground level and walk out onto the arena floor to take in a view that not many people would have wanted to have 2,000 years ago. Avignon has 2 main stations. Gare d'Avignon Centre is located opposite the southern city walls and has local TER services to link Avignon to Lyon, Nîmes, Montpellier and Marseille. Trains take approximately 1 hour to reach the Vitron-Marseille Provence Airport station, from where a shuttle bus runs regularly to Marseille Airport. Marseille Airport has direct connections across Europe, North Africa and the Middle East, as well as links to French overseas territories and limited flights to Canada. Gare d'Avignon TGV, located on the edge of town, linked by regular buses to the city centre, and has high-speed TGV services across France and into Belgium. There's also Spanish AVE services to Madrid and Barcelona, as well as Eurostar services to Belgium and the Netherlands. Until COVID, there were direct summer services from London, but as of 2023, these had still not returned.